Hi, my name is Tim Oppen, and this is my presentation on the Benihana simulation. So I went through each of the individual pieces, and I'll start by going through each and what I learned from each part. And so the first part being to batch versus non-batching. And so in the simulation, you run two different scenarios, one of them being with batching and one being without batching. And what I learned from that was through the process of batching, you're able to group the customers into groups of 8 as opposed to having individuals come in and sit at tables individually. So, by doing that, if you think about how that would work in the process, you'd have more people at one table, so more customers at one table, so that a chef and the wait staff would be able to utilize um, more space and essentially generate more revenue per employee. So the flow rate and throughput is maximized given that scenario. In part two, the overall bar design. So in this one, I ran each of the different scenarios to determine what was the right utilization of the space of the restaurant. And so by doing that, I ran the scenario a few different ways, but essentially what it was the optimal result was to have 79 bar seats and 11 tables. And so by doing that, you're actually having a larger waiting area, which makes sense, kind of given that if you use a batching process, you'll most likely have a larger waiting area as more customers come through that process. So meaning that if you have a batching process that allows for eight people at a table, there'll most likely be a larger waiting area. And through that, you can also generate revenue, as the simulation pointed out. So that was my takeaway from part two. In part three, so the dining time. And so this one, again, is really, I think, focusing on throughput. So if you have a time of 45 minutes as opposed to 75 minutes, I think those were the two different scenarios, in that you really want to maximize the amount of customers that can come through your restaurant quickly, and by doing that, you want to separate that in between time cycles. And so a 7 p.m., kind of the peak hours of reservations and dinner, would be somewhere around the 7 to 8 p.m. range. So by having it at 45 minutes, you're actually able to turn over customers at a much quicker rate. And then if you were able to do it for a 75-minute scenario, 8 p.m. to the close of the restaurant, you actually are able to generate a probably more personal experience, as 75 minutes can be used a lot of different ways. In part four, for advertising, so I looked at each of the different scenarios being just general advertising, discounts and promotions for dinner, and then a happy hour. And happy hour seemed to make the most sense, not only from a promotional standpoint, but really from a cost. So you're only reducing your drink prices by 50 cents. And so by spending 1.5 times the normal budgeted amount, you're able to increase the overall profit by having customers come in at a time that they typically wouldn't. So at 5 p.m., when customers are typically showing up, you wouldn't necessarily have a dinner experience at that time. So by doing that, you're actually increasing revenue at a non-peak time that you wouldn't typically have. So it attracts more customers, and it's relatively inexpensive given the 50-cent reduction. And so that was kind of the learning that I took away from that, is that the other promotions, one of them not being as effective, kind of the word of mouth advertising, and then the other one being a much higher discount. And so the last one, part five, was to look at the batching and timing. So understanding what the batching would look like during peak hours. And so what I learned from that really was that batching is really critical during a peak time, when you need to have kind of a more efficient process, meaning that there's going to be a lot more customers that turn over during that time. And then from a 7 p.m. and 10:30 p.m., you could probably have a more personal experience by just having four people at a table. So, obviously, with there being less customers, you can seat them more quickly. So in this slide, this is where I went through the simulation in total, and so from the learnings that I took from parts 1 through 5, I combined them all, and I ran it several different times before I ended up with the maximum output. Essentially, what I did was I used the same criteria that I had learned from parts 1 through 5, and input that. But what I learned was is that when you isolate those individual components, you may not get the same result as when you combine them. For example, on advertising, I had said on the previous slide that 1.5 times the normal advertising budget was the right criteria to maximize the profit. And so in this scenario, by combining the different pieces together, it's actually 2.8 times the normal budgeting expense. And so that was one takeaway. And so I listed out the different criteria that got me to the table on the right, which is the $642 in profit. So why are these effective is really probably what I'd rather spend the majority of the time on this slide, which is the batching. I think it's understanding when your peak hours are in your business, and then being able to create a process that moves your customers or whatever your revenue generating source is in an efficient way. And so by doing that, you are moving customers through your process, but also doing it in a cost effective way with wait staff and chefs. The bar design really being another critical aspect of that. And so, how do you proportion your bar and your dining area so that you have a large enough waiting area where you're also creating revenue, but also you have enough tables so that it's not a long wait time. And then efficiency and throughput. So really that being, if there's low wait times, this allows more customers to come throughout your business. So again, thinking about it from a peak times perspective, and then understanding the right promotion to drive additional revenue. That really being something that would apply in any business. As you spend more money on advertising, you need to understand what the right ratio, the right cost benefit is to driving additional sources of income. And so in this case, happy hour being really something that was a cost effective way to generate more business. And so finally, I wanted to conclude with what are the key learnings that I took away from this. Again, I've kind of summarized them on the last two slides, but I'll repeat them again. So utilizing batching when appropriate. So I think that was one takeaway for me, was that batching doesn't necessarily always have to apply in every scenario, but it should definitely be something that in critical points in your process, and I'll use the Benihana as an example, during peak hours, you really want to be able to batch a group, whatever that group being, in this case customers, to tables. You want to be able to batch that in groups so that the customers are moving throughout the process in a cost-effective way. The design of the flow. So you want to have a flow that makes sense regardless of what that process is. And in this case, again, being a restaurant, what is the right proportion between bar and dining area? Timing, so controlling demand, and so that was the 45 minutes to 75 minutes. How quickly do you want to move your customers throughout the process? Obviously, you want to create a valuable experience for the customer, but you want to do it in the most time effective way. Cost benefit, again, I mentioned on the last slide. How do you evaluate the right timing the right costs that are associated with driving additional revenue? So you want to make sure that as you spend additional expense on advertising, you're seeing a return in additional income. And then batching during peak times to create flow rate efficiency. And again, that's kind of a summarizing point to this, but what times during the process does it make sense to use the batching process? Overall, I really enjoyed doing this simulation, and I hope that I summarized that in a way that makes sense. Thank you.